In the private critical care wing of St. Bartholomew Hospital, silence carried more authority than prayer. Everything gleamed. The floors reflected the recessed lights in cold, polished strips. The air smelled faintly of lilies, bleach, and money. Nurses moved with practiced restraint. Lawyers spoke in murmurs. Even grief seemed tailored there, dressed in dark wool and delivered in voices low enough not to disturb the machinery of wealth. Behind a set of glass doors, Catherine Whitmore lay in a bed surrounded by machines worth more than most people in the city made in years. 46 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Global Infrastructure, builder of treatment plants, pipelines, redevelopment corridors, and public trust campaigns. A woman who had spent 2 decades convincing investors, regulators, journalists, and rivals that there was nothing in the world she could not control. But death had entered her room without asking permission. 2 hours earlier, a panel of specialists had finally said aloud what the scans, the labs, and the terrified caution in their faces had been hinting at all day. Catherine's liver was failing. Her kidneys were declining fast. Her nervous system was misfiring. Her blood work showed a pattern of toxic injury, inflammatory overload, and organ stress that no one had fully explained in time. Every new treatment seemed to arrive just after another system in her body had begun to collapse. She had, they said, no more than 2 days left. The hospital's executive board had been notified. Family council had been called in. The Whitmore Company's public relations team was already drafting statements heavy with words like legacy, privacy, courage, and strength. In a conference room down the hall, people were quietly preparing for the possibility that the most powerful woman in the city was not going to survive the weekend. By the window of Catherine's suite stood Ethan Whitmore, her half-brother, in a dark suit that fit him too well to be accidental. He received updates with a sorrowful, measured expression that would have looked convincing on television. But beneath the careful grief, there was something more alert in his eyes, something too quick, too calculating, too ready. Inside the bed, Catherine looked nothing like the woman on magazine covers. Her skin had gone pale and gray around the mouth. Her breathing was thin, assisted, monitored, and increasingly fragile. The face that had once held entire rooms still with a single glance now seemed to retreat from the world in small, costly increments. She had built a career on precision, discipline, and refusal. Now she could not even command her own hands to stay still. Outside the VIP elevators, security had tightened. Family only. Authorized physicians only. No press, no confusion, no disruptions. The floor had become a fortress for the dying powerful. That was why the man who appeared at the far end of the corridor looked at first glance less like a visitor than a mistake. He wore work boots scuffed to the leather, jeans faded from years of labor, and a dark jacket damp at the shoulders from evening rain. A worn backpack hung from one shoulder. In one hand, he carried a scratched plastic water bottle, yellowed with age, cloudy at the bottom with settled sediment that looked absurd, almost offensive, beneath the expensive hospital lights. He paused only once, long enough to take in the guarded desk, the cameras, the polished walls, the faces already deciding what he was before he opened his mouth. A poor black man. Uninvited. Unimportant. The kind of man elite institutions trained themselves not to see until security was required. Then he kept walking. If stories about courage, truth, and impossible grace are the kind of stories that stay with you, take a moment to subscribe and follow the channel, because sometimes the most powerful lessons arrive through the people the world almost refuses to hear. A guard stepped in front of him. A nurse turned. Ethan frowned from down the hall. The man tightened his fingers around the bottle until the plastic creaked softly in his hand. His name was Malik Turner, and before anyone on that floor understood why he had come, before anyone knew who he was or what he had carried with him for years, before the hospital's polished silence could close around the moment and kill it, Malik lifted the bottle and said, in a voice roughened by labor, loss, and certainty, "She's not dying from some rare disease. She's dying from the water." For one impossible second, the whole floor went still. Catherine Whitmore had built her life on the belief that weakness invited destruction. She had learned that lesson young and never forgiven the world for teaching it to her so well. Her father, founder of Whitmore Global Infrastructure, had raised children the way men of his generation built companies, with hierarchy, pressure, and selective affection. Ethan had been indulged, excused, and quietly protected. Catherine had been tested. If she wanted respect, she would earn it. If she wanted a future in the company, she would outthink, outwork, and outlast men who had already decided a daughter could inherit stock, but not authority. She did all of it. She became the woman who could walk through a construction site at sunrise, settle a financing dispute by noon, and deliver a televised speech on public trust before dinner without ever appearing rattled. Under her leadership, Whitmore Global expanded into regional infrastructure contracts, advanced water treatment, utility redevelopment, and premium consumer water branding designed to sell confidence as much as purity. Journalists called her relentless. Investors called her indispensable. Younger executives called her intimidating and brilliant in equal measure. The public loved the story of Catherine Whitmore because it seemed to prove something clean and aspirational, that intelligence, discipline, and endurance could still rise above old expectations. What the public did not see was how much of Catherine's strength had hardened into reflex. She trusted results more than people. She trusted systems more than emotion. She did not ignore morality exactly, but she believed scale demanded trade-offs, and that competent leadership often required choosing the least damaging option rather than the perfectly good one. Over the years, those habits built her into a formidable executive. They also made it easier to sign off on summaries instead of reading every buried warning from the field. That mattered now, because years earlier, when the company was pushing aggressively into a redevelopment corridor on the south side of the city, Catherine had approved a series of accelerated infrastructure decisions tied to a project internally known as Red Basin. She had been presented with final packets that showed acceptable environmental risk, manageable variance, and no major contamination concerns. There had been noise from residents, complaints, delays, local agitation. But inside headquarters, the problem had been framed as resistance to development mixed with ordinary implementation challenges. Catherine had believed the packet placed in front of her, or rather she had believed the system that placed it there. Now that system was humming around her deathbed, calm and polished and efficient as ever. Miles away, in a neighborhood the city remembered only when campaigns needed photographs of concern, Malik Turner had spent years learning what institutions did to people like him when their suffering was inconvenient. He lived in a two-bedroom apartment above a shuttered laundromat with his 8-year-old son, Josiah. The radiator clanked in winter. The windows sweated in summer. The faucet in the kitchen still carried a metallic aftertaste no amount of boiling ever seemed to remove. So Malik bought gallon jugs whenever he could and rationed them whenever he could not. He worked wherever work could be found: loading docks, repair shifts, delivery routes, supply runs for clinics, odd construction cleanup, hospital overflow transport. He did not think of himself as proud anymore. Pride was expensive. What he had instead was endurance. Before the world narrowed into bills and survival, Malik had a wife named Aisha. She had been the steady warmth in their home, the one who kept plants on the windowsill, laughed with her whole face, and refused to let hardship define their son. When strange symptoms began to creep through her body years earlier, she tried to endure them at first. Exhaustion, headaches, skin eruptions that came and went, deep, aching pain no one could locate. Then, confusion, tremors, and organ damage that escalated faster than any doctor seemed prepared to admit. One clinic said stress. Another suggested autoimmune complications. Another changed medications and sent her home. By the time toxic exposure was taken seriously, it was too late. Malik remembered every detail he wished he could forget. Aisha gripping the edge of the sink because her hands shook too badly to hold a glass. Josiah asleep in a plastic chair beside her hospital bed. The doctor softening his voice when medicine ran out of answers. The quiet rage of being poor enough that even clear suffering had to prove itself again and again before anyone bothered to see it as real. Around the same time Aisha was getting sick, other people in their neighborhood were getting sick too. Children with unexplained rashes, men with persistent headaches, pets refusing tap water, women speaking in low voices about metallic smells after rain. All of it happening near a construction corridor, where heavy equipment came and went under company logos tied directly or indirectly to the Red Basin redevelopment expansion. One night after a long shift, a young field engineer had stopped near a corner store and spoken quietly to a cluster of residents. He had not given his full name. He had not stayed long. He had only warned them that temporary water handling around the project was not as clean as official notices claimed, and that some internal concerns were being buried before they could trigger delays. "Don't drink from the tap if you can help it," he had said. Most people had no choice. A week later, he was gone. Malik, desperate and suspicious, collected water samples from a runoff channel feeding into the neighborhood distribution line. One bottle he tried unsuccessfully to get tested through agencies that never returned his calls. The second he kept after Aisha died. At first he held on to it because he did not know what else to do with his anger. Later he kept it because grief needed weight, because the world was too ready to misplace poor people's pain unless it could be held in the hand like evidence. Years passed. The plastic bottle yellowed and scratched. The water settled into cloudy stillness at the bottom of a cabinet above his refrigerator. Then, on an ordinary workday that had started before dawn like every other, Malik overheard hospital workers talking near a loading area about Catherine Whitmore. Not the CEO version of her, not the polished public figure, the patient. Critically ill, multi-organ decline, specialists confused, a toxic pattern no one could make sense of. 2 days to live. The words went through him like ice. That night, after Josiah finished homework at the kitchen table, Malik spread old papers beneath the weak overhead light. Medical notes, a dismissed resident complaint, an article about the Red Basin corridor, a magazine profile showing Catherine in a hard hat, smiling beside a filtration unit while holding a clear bottle from Whitmore's premium water line under the slogan, "Trust starts at the source." That was the detail that made the theory feel less impossible. For years, Catherine had done public site visits, rollout events, and promotional campaigns centered around trust in Whitmore's systems. She regularly drank from company-provided filtration products, consumer water lines, and executive supply contracts designed to symbolize confidence in the brand. If the chain of testing had ever been manipulated, if contamination risks had been buried instead of corrected, if old infrastructure compromises had followed later product lines or internal water access systems, then Catherine could have been exposing herself for years through the very products and networks she trusted enough to make part of the company image. It was not a complete answer, but it was enough to terrify him. Josiah looked up from his workbook and studied his father's face. "You got that look again," he said. "What look?" "The one where you stopped being here." Malik stared at the bottle. "What if I need to go somewhere tonight?" he asked. Josiah frowned. "Are you in trouble?" "No." "Is somebody else?" Malik hesitated. "Maybe." Josiah followed his father's gaze to the old bottle. He knew enough now to recognize objects connected to his mother. That one made him go quiet. "Is it about Mom?" he asked. "Partly." The boy sat still for a moment, then asked with devastating simplicity, "Can you help them?" Malik wanted to say he did not know. He wanted to say that helping powerful strangers had never once helped people like them. He wanted to say that truth without protection could get a man broken, arrested, mocked, or made into a headline. Instead, he looked at his son, at the child who had already learned to measure the room before asking for anything, and heard Aisha's voice in memory. Being poor in America means people make you prove your pain before they admit it exists. "I might be able to," Malik said. "Are you scared?" "Yes." Josiah nodded. "You still do stuff when you're scared." Malik almost laughed, then did not. He dressed in the cleanest clothes he owned, told Mrs. Holloway downstairs he might need her to keep an eye on Josiah for a few hours, and left the apartment with the old bottle in his hand. He did not go because he trusted the hospital. He went because silence had already buried one person he loved, and he could not live through helping it bury another. Back in the polished lobby of St. Bartholomew, the receptionist looked at Malik, then at the bottle, then back at Malik with the flat caution reserved for trouble dressed in working clothes. "Family only," she said. "It's medical," Malik replied. "It concerns what's killing her." That sharpened the suspicion instead of easing it. Two security guards began moving toward him without being called. Their timing suggested experience. Their faces suggested they had already categorized him. "Sir," one said, "step away from the desk. Get a doctor. You can't be here. I said get a doctor." People nearby started pretending not to stare. Malik felt humiliation rise hot in his throat, but beneath it was a steadier force. He had expected this. Places like this always made the same first move. They turned urgency into bad manners. They turned grief into disruption. They turned truth into a breach of protocol. The younger guard reached for his arm. "Don't touch me," Malik snapped. That was when Ethan appeared from the private elevator. He took in the scene almost instantly. The guards, the bottle, the poor black stranger holding his ground, the nervous reception staff, and adjusted his expression into something sober and concerned. "What's going on?" Ethan asked. The receptionist answered quickly. "This man is making claims about your sister's condition and refusing to leave." Ethan stepped closer, smooth and controlled. "Sir, my sister is critically ill. If you're here to exploit that, you should reconsider." Malik stared at him. "I'm here because she's being poisoned." Several heads turned. Ethan's face barely changed, but a colder light flickered through his eyes. "That's enough," he said to security. "Remove him." Malik lifted the bottle. "My wife died after drinking water tied to one of Whitmore's old projects. Catherine Whitmore has the same symptoms." "This is nonsense," Ethan said. "Red Basin," Malik said. The word landed. Ethan recovered quickly, but not quickly enough to hide that for one fraction of a second, he knew exactly what it meant. Before security could drag Malik out, another voice cut through the tension. "Wait!" The speaker was a tall, middle-aged physician in a dark coat, carrying himself with the lean, tired focus of a man who had been solving impossible problems too long to have much patience left for vanity. "I'm Dr. Samuel Adebola," he said. "Who are you?" "Malik Turner." "What exactly are you claiming?" Ethan answered for him. "Nothing credible." Samuel did not look away from Malik. "I asked him." So Malik told him, fast and stripped of all drama. Wife, neighborhood sickness, Red Basin corridor, old warnings, water sample preserved because no one had listened. Symptoms matching the unexplained toxic pattern currently killing Catherine. Samuel's expression remained cautious but not dismissive. That distinction alone felt radical. "What do you know about Ms. Whitmore's case?" Samuel asked. "Only what I heard from hospital workers downstairs," Malik said. "But I know what my wife looked like when toxic damage was moving through her body, and nobody wanted to say it yet." That caught Samuel's attention because he already suspected toxic involvement. It had been in Catherine's labs from the beginning in inconsistent, frustrating traces. Enough to bother him, not enough to explain everything on its own. Her care team had treated those markers as secondary noise in a more complicated collapse. Samuel had never been entirely comfortable with that explanation. Now a stranger had arrived carrying a possible environmental mirror of the same pattern. At Samuel's side stood Halima Sadiq, a nurse from the unit who had heard enough elite families weaponize procedure to know when a human being was being erased in real time. "Doctor," she said quietly, "Ms. Whitmore's addendum tox panel still doesn't reconcile with the current working diagnosis." Ethan turned toward her with irritation. "I'm sure your concern is noted." Halima met his gaze. "It's in the chart." Samuel looked back at Malik. "Come with me." "Absolutely not," Ethan said. Samuel's tone cooled. "Mr. Whitmore, unless you intend to override medicine with a family name, let me do my job." Malik was taken not to Catherine's room, but to a small consultation space near the service corridor, where the luxury of the VIP wing gave way to ordinary fluorescent practicality. Samuel asked for dates, symptoms, locations, any documentation Malik had. Halima listened closely, asking clarifying questions that brought out details grief had blurred. When Malik finished, Samuel took the bottle in gloved hands and held it under the harsh light. "I can't promise this means anything," he said. "I know, but I already suspected chronic toxic exposure might be part of her collapse. I didn't have a source that made sense." Malik felt something in his chest loosen and tighten at once. Samuel continued, "If your wife's symptom sequence truly parallels hers, and if this sample shows the kind of mixed contamination profile I'm worried about, then at minimum this becomes a lead. Not proof, a lead." It was the first time that night anyone with power had spoken to Malik like a man rather than a disturbance. Samuel sent the sample for an urgent preliminary screen and reopened Catherine's toxicology review with fresh eyes. While he moved between labs and Catherine's room, the hospital began turning against Malik in quiet, efficient ways. A new security officer appeared outside the consultation room. An administrator requested Malik's full name, address, and reason for entering the restricted floor. A legal representative for the Whitmore family asked whether he had spoken to reporters. Everything arrived wrapped in politeness, which made it more menacing, not less. Halima stayed close enough to interrupt when the questions became too interested in his unauthorized presence and not interested enough in why he was there. "He is relevant to an active medical inquiry," she said coolly. "That has not been formally established," the administrator replied. "It has been established enough to trigger urgent review," Halima said. "If you need more than that, speak to Dr. Adebola." They backed off, but only temporarily. Then the media found out. A clip appeared online showing Malik in the lobby holding the bottle and saying, "Don't touch me," with everything before and after cropped away. Local outlets ran breathless headlines about an unidentified man causing a disturbance during the medical crisis of a famous CEO. Anonymous family sources worried about extortion, exploitation, emotional instability, opportunism. Malik stared at one headline on a borrowed phone and felt cold all the way through. It was happening exactly the way poor people always knew it would happen. The truth was being laundered through class and race until all that remained was a story society found easier to believe. The disruptive, poor black man threatening order around a dying white woman. "He moved fast," Halima murmured. "Ethan," Malik said. She did not deny it. Hours passed. Catherine worsened. Samuel pushed for deeper comparison. The first lab screen on Malik's bottle came back with findings that made the room go still. The sample contained a mixed profile of contaminants that should not have appeared together in untreated environmental water. Trace industrial stabilizers, heavy metal burden, organic solvent residue, and signatures of aging contamination. Several markers overlapped, in pattern if not concentration, with anomalies in Catherine's blood and tissue work. Not enough to close the case. More than enough to make Samuel deeply uneasy about the current treatment path. "My wife," Malik said quietly. Samuel nodded once. "Possibly." "And Catherine?" "Possibly. Strongly enough that I'm no longer comfortable ignoring it." Then Catherine crashed. Monitors alarmed. Staff converged. Through the partly open doorway, Malik saw only flashes. Catherine's body rigid with tremors. Samuel calling for updated readings, Ethan demanding answers. Then Catherine opened her eyes. At first, they wandered over lights and faces without focus. Samuel, thinking aloud, said something to a resident about the toxic panel still failing to reconcile with the presumed cause. He muttered that if this traced back to an old infrastructure chain, they might be looking in the wrong decade entirely. Catherine's gaze sharpened. "Source?" she whispered. Samuel moved closer. "We're reviewing possibilities." Malik had taken one involuntary step forward before a guard shifted toward him. Catherine's eyes drifted toward the dark shape of the old bottle on the counter outside the room. Then Samuel, still thinking out loud, said, "If it reaches back to Red Basin." Catherine made a sound that stopped everyone. "Red Basin," she said. The room froze. Samuel bent over her. "What about Red Basin?" Her breathing hitched painfully. She seemed to be reaching through layers of sedation and damage toward some half-buried memory. "Report," she whispered. "Water variance. Flagged. Then gone." Malik felt the truth acquire shape. Catherine was not reacting like a woman hearing an accusation for the first time. She was reacting like a woman remembering that once, long ago, someone had tried to tell the company something, and the warning had disappeared before it became expensive enough to matter. Ethan moved fast. "She's delirious," he said. "Doctor, this is absurd." Samuel did not look up. "Maybe. Or maybe your sister just named an internal project connected to an erased warning. That project closed years ago." Malik turned on him. "So you know exactly what I'm talking about." Ethan's face hardened. "I know opportunism when I see it." Samuel demanded every archived record connected to Red Basin, environmental review notes, revision history, contractor variance reports, compliance summaries. Ethan promised cooperation too quickly, which was its own warning. From that moment on, Malik was no longer merely a trespasser with a tragic story. He was a threat, and Ethan understood it better than anyone else in the room. The counterattack came on 3 fronts at once. First, procedure. Hospital administration suddenly became very interested in access rules, chain of custody, liability exposure, and documentation thresholds for any treatment revision connected to a non-standard environmental lead. Family counsel pressed harder. Samuel's recommendation to reframe Catherine's collapse around chronic toxic exposure met resistance from people who wanted certainty before action, even though certainty was the one thing Catherine no longer had time for. Second, records. The first batch of archived Red Basin materials arrived in summary form only. Clean, neat, and suspiciously incomplete. Early review references hinted at a water variance issue. Final packets showed no significant contamination concern. Revision history was missing where it should have existed. The gap was too precise to be innocent. Third, narrative. The media cycle escalated. Malik's face appeared on local broadcasts as the man at the center of hospital turmoil. Commentators speculated about mental instability, extortion, racialized anger they pretended not to racialize, and the dangers of letting emotionally compromised outsiders interfere with elite medical care. By then it was close to midnight. Samuel came back to the consultation room looking exhausted and furious, in the controlled way only serious men permitted themselves. His tie was loosened. His eyes had that flat brightness physicians got when too many pressures were converging at once. "The comparison strengthened the overlap," he said. "Not enough for certainty, enough for me to push harder." "That's good," Malik replied. "It would be if medicine were the only thing in the room," he explained quickly. The toxic markers now looked more meaningful, not less. Catherine's exposure pattern fit the theory of cumulative poisoning through prolonged ingestion rather than acute contamination. And Samuel now had a plausible path. Executive office filtration contracts and premium water products tied to an internal supply line that had inherited oversight structures from Red Basin-era cost-saving measures. Catherine had, in effect, been drinking from a trusted chain built on old compromises. There it was at last. The concrete mechanism. Not magic, not coincidence, not one sip from a random source. Years of routine exposure through systems her own company had branded as safe. That knowledge should have made everything easier. Instead, Ethan arrived with an attorney and a private security supervisor. He entered the consultation room like a man reclaiming order. "This has gone far enough," Ethan said. Samuel stepped between him and Malik. "You don't enter my consultation room and dictate terms." Ethan ignored him. "My sister's treatment will not be driven by a grief-stricken stranger carrying a bottle from a construction runoff ditch." Malik rose. "Say grief like it makes me wrong again." The attorney took over in a calm, expensive voice. Malik had entered a restricted floor without authorization. He had introduced unverified material into a medical environment. He had contributed to reputational damage and media instability. Pending further review, he needed to leave. Halima crossed her arms. He is central to the lead that reopened this case. He is central to chaos, Ethan snapped. My sister is dying and all of you are turning her final hours into theater. That did it. Not because the insult was clever, but because it was so familiar. Malik moved closer, anger burning through exhaustion. You think grief makes people stupid because men like you have never had to memorize your pain just to make anybody listen? I know the order my wife's symptoms came in. I know what our water smelled like after rain. I know what was said on our block while your project signs towered over us. I know your sister said Red Basin before I said another word. And I know you're scared because for the first time, the lie didn't stay buried where you left it. The room fell silent. Ethan's polished mask slipped. The contempt underneath was naked now. Before the confrontation could break further, Halima's pager sounded, and a second later another nurse opened the door, breathless. Dr. Adebola, she said. Her pressure's crashing again. Samuel turned immediately. Ethan grabbed his arm. What happens next will follow approved protocol. Samuel pulled free. What happens next is I try to save your sister. He was gone. Halima followed after one last look at Malik, full of warning, urgency, and apology. This time, Malik did not resist when security took his arms. He knew resistance would only feed the image already being built around him. They walked him past polished floors, expensive flowers, and the sealed doors behind which Catherine Whitmore was dying under the weight of a truth too many people preferred to keep abstract. At the lobby exit, a camera flashed from across the driveway. Someone had tipped off the press. Another flash burst white across the rain-dark glass. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, the security supervisor murmured. Harder than it needs to be. That was what power always called it when the wrong person refused to disappear on schedule. They pushed Malik into the cold night. Rain slicked the pavement until the hospital lights looked broken in it. Malik stood under the awning breathing hard, one hand pressed against the old bottle still in his jacket. Camera flashes snapped from somewhere across the drive. Reporters shouted questions about extortion, family threats, and motive. He ignored them and moved toward the curb, mind already jumping ahead to Josiah. Then his phone vibrated. Mrs. Holloway. He answered at once. Malik, she whispered. Some man came by asking if Josiah was here, said he was checking on your family from the hospital. Ice went through him. Did you open the door? No. What did he look like? White, suit coat, not hospital staff, too smooth. Did he leave? I think so. Been watching through the peephole. Malik shut his eyes for 1 second. This was no longer vague danger, no longer implied consequences. Someone had gone looking for his son. Keep the door locked, he said. Call the police if he comes back. I'm on my way. He started down the steps, then stopped halfway. Above him, behind sealed glass and layers of privilege, Catherine Whitmore was likely dying in real time. Samuel might have found enough to force a treatment change. Halima might be holding the line alone. Ethan, with money, lawyers, and a family name honed by decades of influence, was probably trying to close every opening Malik had managed to rip into the story. Go home, one part of him said. Take your son. Disappear. Let the rich bury their own. But another voice rose from deeper down, shaped by Aisha's final weeks and every bureaucratic face that had found it easier to doubt her than help her. If Malik walked away now, he might protect Josiah for one night, but he would also teach him something poisonous, that truth belonged only to people safe enough to tell it. His phone rang again. Halima. He answered. Where are you? She asked. Outside. Don't leave yet. Samuel found something in the records. What? Original revision history, not just summaries. A former compliance analyst finally sent a copied packet directly after Samuel kept pushing. The Red Basin warning was real. Severe contamination risk. It was downgraded twice after contractor cost reviews. Ethan's approval chain is on the subcontract oversight page. Malik gripped the phone tighter. And Catherine? Still critical. Samuel says if we can confirm the exposure chain strongly enough, he can justify a full treatment shift now. Malik looked toward the street, toward the direction of home, toward his son behind a locked apartment door with a frightened older neighbor. Mrs. Holloway says some man came by asking about Josiah. A beat. That was not hospital staff, Halima said. Her voice changed, gaining edge. Listen to me. Our hospital security can release exterior footage if there was a private car pickup for Ethan's people. Samuel already alerted an internal compliance officer and a trusted detective liaison because of the media escalation. If someone connected to Ethan went near your son, that becomes part of a much larger crime. Go to the front desk. Do not leave the grounds yet. For the first time since the call, Malik felt the panic narrow into direction. Josiah is safer if the threat gets documented now, Halima said. Mrs. Holloway has neighbors. You running alone in the dark helps Ethan more than it helps your son. She was right. Malik hated that she was right, but she was. He turned back toward the glass doors. Aisha died because nobody with power wanted trouble, he said half to himself. And Catherine will too if they win tonight, Halima replied. Malik walked back into the hospital. This time he did not come in through the lobby. Halima met him at a side entrance used for staff supply transfers and took him through narrow service corridors stripped of all luxury. The farther they moved from the public face of St. Bartholomew, the more the building looked like what it really was. Pipes, storage, fatigue, fluorescent light, and human beings trying to hold back death one room at a time. On the way, Halima filled him in. Samuel had kept pushing until a former compliance analyst tied to Whitmore's archived legal retention desk, spooked by the possibility of a wrongful death scandal, sent over copied files she had saved years earlier before certain revisions disappeared from the central system. In those files, the truth was unmistakable. The first Red Basin environmental warning had flagged severe contamination risk in temporary water handling infrastructure near the Channel Basin. A follow-up memo recommended halting the cost-cutting subcontract arrangement until full testing was completed. That memo had then been softened. A later summary removed the halt recommendation altogether. And on the contractor oversight review sat Ethan Whitmore's approval notation beside a budget adjustment reducing independent monitoring frequency. Not only that, an internal product transition document connected the same oversight network to an executive and premium filtration supply chain later used to service corporate offices, branded events, and internal trust demonstrations. In other words, the culture of concealment born in Red Basin had not stayed in Red Basin. It had flowed upward into newer systems Catherine herself relied on every day. When Malik and Halima reached the corridor outside Catherine's suite, Samuel was waiting with printed pages in one hand and a lab report in the other. His face looked like stone. The independent tox comparison just came through, he said. It confirms the compound profile match strongly enough for emergency reclassification. Not from your old bottle alone. The bottle led us there. The corporate supply records and her consumption logs finish the line. She has had repeated exposure over years through Whitmore executive filtration and branded water stock tied to compromised oversight. Malik stared at him. So she really was drinking it? Yes, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The company had sold trust. Catherine had consumed it, and the lie, patient and invisible, had finally turned inward. Can you save her? Malik asked. Samuel answered like a doctor, which meant with no false promise. I can finally treat the right enemy. Inside the room, Catherine looked scarcely conscious. Her skin was damp, her breathing shallow. Monitors painted her suffering in precise digital numbers. The woman who had once commanded billion-dollar negotiations now seemed held to the world by wires, fluids, and dwindling time. Ethan arrived seconds later with counsel at his shoulder, anger making him reckless now. This stops, he said. You are not changing protocol based on stolen internal documents and the ranting of a stranger. Samuel held up the pages. These are direct archived copies with revision data and cross-linked oversight signatures. My sister is in no condition for this. She is in precisely the condition that requires this. It's too late anyway. The sentence slipped out before Ethan could stop it. Everyone heard it. Catherine's eyelids fluttered. Samuel stepped to her side. Catherine, if you can hear me, we know what this is. Long-term toxic exposure through compromised Whitmore supply channels. We can change treatment now, but I need to know if you understand. For a terrible second, nothing happened. Then Catherine opened her eyes. Pain moved slowly across her face, but beneath it there was recognition, and something worse than fear. Shame. Not complete knowledge, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand that the company she had defended with discipline and distance had poisoned strangers first, and then, by way of its own arrogance, poisoned her too. Ethan moved toward the bed. Cat, don't, you're confused. Samuel blocked him. Catherine's gaze drifted, found Malik standing near the back of the room and rested there. The poor black stranger from the corridor. The man carrying a filthy old bottle into a sterile palace. The man her world would have dismissed on sight. The man who had crossed the city to tell the truth while people born into her privilege prepared her obituary. With what little strength remained, she lifted her hand. It shook so badly the movement almost disappeared into the blankets. Samuel caught it gently. Yes, Catherine whispered. The word barely existed, but it was enough. Enough consent for treatment. Enough confession that some buried part of her remembered the warning that had vanished. Enough for Samuel to move. The next hour was violent in the way medicine becomes violent when time is almost gone. New protocols were activated. Existing assumptions were abandoned. Chelation, detox support, metabolic stabilization, targeted countermeasures, fluid recalibration, specialist consults brought in on emergency override. Staff shifted around Catherine's bed with the hard concentration of people gambling against death with data, skill, and exhausted hope. Ethan objected at every turn until hospital compliance, now aware of the archived revision trail and potential family interference, removed him from immediate decision-making. The same internal security system that had once escorted Malik out now began documenting Ethan's calls, access attempts, and external contacts, especially after surveillance review linked one of his private contractors to the man who had gone looking for Josiah. For the first time in his life, Ethan discovered what it felt like when systems stopped bending toward him. By dawn, Catherine had not recovered, but she had not died. Her numbers, which had been plunging for hours, leveled. Then one marker improved slightly, then another. It was not a miracle in the childish sense. It was not cinematic resurrection. It was smaller and harder and far more astonishing than that. The wrong story had stopped killing her. Truth had arrived in time. Weeks later, the city would know only fragments of what happened inside St. Bartholomew that night. It would know that Catherine Whitmore survived a catastrophic medical crisis initially believed to be terminal. It would know that Whitmore Global Infrastructure became the center of multiple investigations into historical environmental concealment, compromised oversight, and executive supply exposure connected to Red Basin and related water networks. It would know that Ethan Whitmore resigned under pressure before facing civil and criminal scrutiny tied to document suppression, contractor misconduct, witness intimidation, and obstruction surrounding Catherine's care. It would know that a private contractor linked to Ethan was identified in the attempted intimidation near Malik's apartment, leading to charges that widened the case. But the public would not know everything. It would not know how close Samuel had come to being overruled. It would not know how Halima had stood in the narrow spaces between hierarchy and conscience, holding those spaces open long enough for truth to breathe. It would not know the exact expression on Catherine's face when she finally read the early Red Basin warning in full during recovery. The look of a woman seeing too late the moral cost of trusting systems simply because they were efficient. Catherine did not transform overnight into a saint. Survival did not erase the years she had spent choosing summaries over scrutiny, distance over listening, Momentum over doubt. She could not give Malik his wife back. She could not return health to the residents who had lived inside consequences her company once minimized. And she was intelligent enough not to insult pain with easy redemption. So she did the harder thing. She listened. She met families from the old corridor, not for cameras but in closed rooms with no press access. She ordered independent reviews not controlled by Whitmore legal strategy. She restructured environmental oversight beyond what investors considered comfortable. She reopened compensation channels. She disclosed enough to damage the company's image because anything less would have been another burial disguised as management. When she finally sat across from Malik Turner in a quiet hospital recovery room weeks after the crisis, there were no speeches ready for either of them. Malik had expected gratitude to sound polished coming from someone like her. Instead, Catherine looked older than before, thinner, less armored. "I signed packets I should not have trusted," she said. "Yes," Malik replied. "I told myself scale required delegation." "Yes." "I thought competence would protect people." He held her gaze. "Competence without courage protects systems." Catherine absorbed that without argument. After a long silence, she said, "I can't ask you for forgiveness." "No," Malik said, "you can't." Another silence. Then Catherine looked at the old bottle resting on the table between them. "You kept it all those years." "I kept it because nobody listened." "I did now." Malik thought about that, about Aisha, about Josiah, about the humiliations of that night, about the fact that Catherine Whitmore had nearly died from the same machinery she once trusted enough to sign with a pen and move on. "You listened when it started killing you too," he said. The words landed and Catherine did not defend herself. That, more than any apology, told him something had changed. Malik did not become rich. He did not move into a safer neighborhood the following week. He did not step into some fantasy version of justice where one act of courage erased the arithmetic of class in America. He still had rent, still had work, still had a son to raise inside a country that preferred resilience in poor people because resilience was cheaper than fairness. But something in the world had shifted. Aisha's story was no longer a private wound dismissed as bad luck. The truth had a name now, so did the harm. And Josiah, who had spent years watching his father survive, finally got to watch him stand. That mattered. On the walk home from school one evening, Josiah slipped his hand into Malik's and said, with the strange seriousness children sometimes carried into simple sentences, "I used to think being brave meant being strong." Malik glanced down. "What do you think now?" Josiah kicked at a crack in the sidewalk. "I think it means telling the truth when somebody powerful wants you quiet." Malik looked ahead at the long block, the brick buildings catching evening light, the ordinary world still moving without fanfare around them. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think that's closer." From the top floor of a recovery unit weeks earlier, Catherine had once watched Malik and his son walk away from the hospital and understood something no quarterly report or market analysis had ever taught her. Sometimes the person carrying grace into the room is the very person the room was built to keep out. And sometimes a bottle of dirty water, held by a grieving man everyone wanted removed, can do what wealth, status, and reputation could not. It can force the truth to live. If this story stayed with you, let it stay for the right reasons. As a reminder that dignity does not come from money, that courage is not reserved for the powerful, and that the voices most often dismissed are sometimes the ones carrying the warning that can save a life. If you believe stories like this deserve a place in the world, subscribe and follow the channel. And wherever you are, remember this: never be too impressed by power to question it, and never be too quick to ignore the pain of someone the world has taught itself not to see.